passengers travelling to the interpretation station, please alight now.
Episode 10 of the Interpretation Station is Call to Order. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everybody to this 10th episode. We're into double figures. It's been a couple of months now, and so we're doing okay. We're on to number 10. So we're going to be doing some Spanish today. It's been a few weeks since we last did a Spanish text, and it's a bit of a funny coincidence, a bit of a sad coincidence actually. So this text we're going to be doing, it's Argentina. They'll be speaking about the Falkland Islands, or the Malvinas if you prefer, whatever your flavor is. Yeah, it's funny. So yesterday, Diego Maradona died, the Argentinian footballer. One of the greatest footballers that ever lived, the greatest perhaps, depending on who you ask. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? So I come to do Argentina, and the most famous Argentinian ever dies. He was a hell of a player. So anyway, it's a bit of a shorter text that we're going to be doing today. It's going to be it's actually just a right to reply. So we've been doing some quite long episodes recently. So this is a bit of a shorter one. It's a different style. And as I say, it's different in that, so we've been doing more sort of wide-ranging political statements. This is a very procedural text in its nature, and it's actually quite challenging, just because there's not really as much room for error in this kind of a statement. So the context is this was actually delivered just a couple of weeks ago, and so yeah, this text was delivered a couple of weeks ago, and it's to do with what is still an ongoing sovereignty dispute between the UK and Argentina over basically who the Falklands or Malvinas belong to. You're probably familiar with the Falklands War in 1982. Funnily enough, for me, that's one of the first items of news that seemed to make an impression on my tender, at that point, 5 or 6 year old mind. So I was born 1977. The Falklands War was in 1982. I seem to remember talk of this conflict at the time. Now, as you know, so the UK basically won that war and established sovereignty then, but the Argentinians still maintain to this day that the sort of the islands are rightfully theirs. No, I'm not going to say either way. I'm neutral as far. But I'm going to be I'm giving just a little bit of a history of that conflict, just to give you a bit of background before we start. There's one other thing I'd also say. So I've got 3 languages, you see. So I've got Russian, French, and Spanish that I work from. They're my working languages. And so I've got to say that Spanish is the language I probably feel least comfortable with of the 3. So I have to still practice it a lot. Now, this is a very good text because, as I say, with the political statements, you see, I feel very comfortable. The general, more broad, sweeping subjects. But with this kind of procedural text, where there are very specific instructions, these are the sort of texts that actually sometimes give me the willies, because you have to be very precise in what you're saying. The ambassador is giving specific instructions here to the Secretariat on how they should proceed. And if you fail to properly convey what the delegate is after, what's going to happen is the Secretary is then going to reply saying, I I think something got lost in translation. Ha ha ha. Awkwardly. And then ask them probably to repeat it. At which point the delegate, well, there's a good chance the delegate will basically go in a huff, and then he'll either repeat it, what he said, and you hope to, like hell, that you get it right the second time, or he'll go into English. Either way, you don't come out looking very good. So you have to be, as I say, very careful with these this nature of procedural statement, and ensure you reflect exactly what is being said, what is being requested, and so on. Okay, so before we start with the actual recording, I'm going to give you a little walk through the history of the Falkland Islands. Okay, so today the Falklands are probably best known for these residents. I think they're the most populous residents in the Falkland Islands. These friendly fellows here. Aren't they cute? Oh yes, aren't they cute? To give you an exact idea of where these islands are located, maybe have a look at this map here, it'll show you. So there you have the Falklands Islands here. West Falkland, this is East Falkland. Port Stanley is the capital. Here you have South Georgia Island, and you also have another little group of islands which are around about here. They're called the South Sandwich Islands. So you'll notice that Britain just tends to talk about the Falkland Islands. Argentina tends to view them as a package of a single territory. So they will always talk about the Malvinas, South Georgia, and South Sandwich Islands. Now, the reason for that is that initially, so the Falklands are a UK overseas territory, and South Georgia and South Sandwich were territorial dependencies of the Falklands. And then that status was changed at some point in the 20th century, I think. But as far as the Argentinians are concerned, they come as one package, together with the surrounding maritime area, which is perhaps one of the most important elements of this dispute in its current shape. And I'll tell you a bit more about that a little bit later. To give you a bit of history then. So 1764 is the first notable date, and that is when the French establish first permanent settlement in the islands. And here's a bit of interesting general knowledge for you. Why do the Argentinians call them the Malvinas? Well, it was the French that first gave them the name Les Malouines. That's what the French call them. Be aware of that, because the initial settlers there came from Saint Malo in France, that port town, not far from, pretty close to Britain, I think. They were from Saint Malo. Here's another map, just to give you again a sort of bit of context in terms of distance where the islands are in relation to Argentina. Falkland here. So the Falklands are about 300 miles away from the mainland. And then you can see how far away, again, South Georgia and South Sandwich are from the Falklands themselves. So it covers a pretty large area. So the South Georgia, South Sandwich must be getting on for 1,000 miles away from South America, which admittedly is still, closer than the UK is to them, but anyway. Anyway, so the French had their settlement. And then... So that French colony didn't last for very long. So the very next year, 1765, the British actually came along and took control of it. Then 1770, the Spanish then arrive at the island, the Kingdom of Spain, in even bigger numbers. They come with 1,500 men and 5 ships, and they establish their presence there. And over the next few years, things are pretty tense between generally the Spanish and the Great Britain, the United Kingdom, until in 1811, the Spanish are forced to withdraw their garrison there because back in Europe, they're busy fighting basically what's called the Peninsular War. So in what is Spain, and Portugal, I guess, against Napoleon's armies. Now, 1816, what we know today as Argentina, what was then called the United Provinces of Rio Plata, declare independence from Spain. Now, UK officially recognizes this in 1825. And then the next individual of interest here is this guy called Louis Verne, who is, if you like, well, he's a bit of a privateer. He's a bit of a venture capitalist, you might say, a latter-day Elon Musk. So in 1820, so he's from Hamburg. He's a Huguenot. He's believed to be a Huguenot, so French Protestant originally, or at least a French Protestant stock. He establishes a settlement there at the second time of asking in 1828 with the permission, with the blessing of the government in Buenos Aires. The following year, Argentina appoints him the governor of the islands. Then we move on now to then the next four. So he's there in the Malvinas. The main industry then of the islands is cattle breeding and seal hunting, and there's over the course of the next 4 years, he has difficulty really getting things going. There's other interests involved. There's a couple of clashes with American shipping around the island. Anyway, in 1833, Britain decides to sort of put its foot down and reestablishes its rule there in protest at Verne's appointment as the governor, and also as part of a dispute over fishing rights. And so from then on, from 1833 onwards, pretty much Britain has had sovereignty over the Falklands since then. 1850, agreement is reached, a treaty is signed, the Arana Southern Treaty, also known as the Convention of Settlement, to which is often pointed to as Argentina sort of basically conceding sovereignty to the UK, depending on how you read the treaty. In any case, after the signing of that treaty, there's barely any mention of the Falklands, Malvinas by Argentina again until 1941. Pretty much things go completely quiet. In 1884, Argentina does request international arbitration. The UK says no, and that's pretty much it until 1941. So we're now moving into the middle of World War II. And here you have the first Argentinian, the message to the Congress, where the issue of sovereignty is raised. And then in 1945, Argentina's opening address to the United Nations General Assembly, they raise the question of the Malvinas. Next important date, 1960. So the UN passes resolution. This is an important one to know, actually. 1514 Roman 15 on calling for an end to colonization. So that is a resolution that is frequently cited whenever the UN holds these meetings, and they still do on certain territories that are subject to colonization. 15. Those territories, just so this is the sort of purview of a committee called the Special Decolonization Committee, and they do meet every now and then. In fact, I even attended once a meeting of theirs that was held in Managua, in Nicaragua, in 2015. And so the issues that come up are like the Falklands, Malvinas, Puerto Rico, the South Sahara, which is part of Morocco, Gibraltar. So these issues that you think are sort of more or less have been that you would think have maybe been put to bed, they still occasionally raise their head. Anyway, going back to a bit of the history, 1967, the UK opens negotiations as states a willingness perhaps to transfer sovereignty. 1973, Argentinian President Perón renews sovereignty claim for Argentina. UK says no. However, during the whole 70s, you're seeing basically British are sort of losing interest, really, in the Falklands, in South Georgia, South Sandwich. There's a definite. It's very clear at the time that they're not that bothered about the subject, and in fact, things were perhaps could have perhaps moved towards a transfer of sovereignty peacefully had circumstances and all that. 1980, the idea of a leaseback arrangement is proposed by the British, whereby this would have been something similar to the situation with Hong Kong, whereby Argentina would have received sovereignty, but the British would have received the islands on a lease, probably for a period of 100 years, which I think was the same with Hong Kong. So this was raised by one of the British ministers of state, a guy called Nicholas Ridley, in meetings with, I guess, his Argentinian counterpart. Now, the Falklanders themselves were very much against this, and so ultimately this idea of the lease back was shelved. Now, this time also you have in Argentina big political goings on. You have a sort of military junta comes to power under Galtieri. So the economy's in a very bad way, and it's the old classic trick to divert attention from problems at home. You sort of start a conflict abroad to try and unify the nation, and that is really precisely what happened here. And in April, April 2nd, 1982, Argentina takes the Falklands Islands. There's hardly anyone is killed in the invasion. It happens quite peacefully, but they establish sovereignty there. Now, in the UK, Margaret Thatcher is in power, and she decides to respond. And war, I was going to say war is declared, but this is the funny thing with the Falklands War. This was an undeclared war. So neither side ever actually declared that they were at war with the other. But obviously, so there were certainly quite a few warlike goings on for the duration of 3 months. So the UK sends a task force across the Atlantic down there to try and retake the islands. Now, the sort of signature events in that war, I don't know how much you know, but there's a couple of signature events, standout events. One is the sinking of the Argentinian ship, the Belgrano, I believe in early May of 1982. This is a sinking that caused, even today, is still a source of quite some controversy over whether or not the Belgrano was entering or leaving the sort of the conflict zone, the area of operations, as it were. So I'm not actually certain what the final conclusion was. It seems to be that it was heading away from the conflict, the sort of battle area, but with a view to coming in from a different side. Interestingly enough, the Belgrano was formerly, another bit of just general knowledge, the USS Phoenix, which survived the Pearl Harbor bombing. Yep, can you believe that? It was the same ship that it survived Pearl Harbor. Anyway, it didn't survive that. Another sort of famous incident, this time on the British side, was the sinking of the HMS Sheffield by I believe it was an Exocet missile. So the Argentinians, interestingly, had a lot of French-made weaponry that they'd bought all their weapons from France. So they sank. This was a couple of days after the sinking of the Belgrano. Then they sank the HMS Sheffield. Anyway, so the UK sent a task force in, and on 14th of June, Argentina surrendered. And well, since then, the British have basically had full sovereignty over the Falklands, Sandwich, Georgia, and so on. Now, it's come back into the news a bit more in recent years. So Argentina still haven't, as I say, rescinded their claim to the islands. And I think this was particularly spurred by the fact when it was hinted that there might be quite large reserves of oil present in the waters of these islands, which is obviously quite a big deal. I mean, I don't know. I don't suppose they're particularly bothered about exercising sovereignty over the populace of the Falklands, but oil's always good. Anyway, I don't know if they what the situation is exactly with oil, but if you look here, I thought it was interesting to look at Rockhopper Exploration Plc. So they're the company that has been sort of carrying out the exploration in those waters for oil. And this is just their share price going back 15 years since it was set up. So it seems it was set up in 2005. And here you see this big spike in the price in 2010 when they started exploration, prospecting, and so on. But you'll see now that it's actually gone right back down to £6. So it's actually shares are worth less in it now than they were when they were first on the market. Significantly less, actually. See, 53, and now it's just 6. So does that would I get maybe point to suggest that there isn't maybe as much oil as was initially thought. So anyway, that gives you a bit of an idea of what we're going to be looking at in this statement. As I say, it's important with to get the terminology correct in a statement of this kind. So, as I say, the Argentinians are refer to these islands as the Malvinas, South Georgia and South Sandwich, and the surrounding maritime area, and they're real sticklers for that. By the way, just before we move to the actual recording, this is a useful page also to have a look at, and here it shows you the grounds of Argentina's current claim, ongoing claim to the Malvinas. And so if you look here on this page, actually you see the grounds of Argentina's sovereignty claim. It's good. It gives you these bullet points. It's the sort of legal grounds. I'll just tell you that the two important ones that are often raised here. The principle of self-determination is not applicable since the current inhabitants are not aboriginal and were brought to replace the Argentinian population. So the Argentinians will often talk about them being an implanted population, implantado, because they weren't there. They weren't the indigenous people. They say that the British basically came there and settled their own people on the island, kicked the Argentinians who had been there off, and then settled their own people there. And then also the principle of self-determination does not apply to the sovereignty question because, as Argentina argues, the current inhabitants are a transplanted population of British character and nationality, not a distinct people as required by external self-determination doctrine. So they say that self-determination in this case doesn't count because, as it does for most indigenous people, that's a big thing in the UN. Like the indigenous people should have self-determination. They say no, the British were transplanted here, and that's this principle of self-determination is not applicable, therefore, in this case. Because I know there was also a referendum a few years ago that the Falklanders held. It was purely sort of pro forma sort of thing when the Argentinians were starting to, make their claims heard a bit louder. The Falklanders held their own referendum on whether they wanted to be ruled by Britain or Argentina, and obviously the result was very much in favour of British rule. So anyway, that gives you a bit of background to the situation, and so we'll now move on to the actual recording. Just remember that line I gave you, the Argentinians had, they refer to it, Malvinas, South Georgia and South Sandwich and the surrounding maritime area. That's the important terminology you need to know. So with that, we'll move now to the recording. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get things going here. So this statement is provided to us courtesy of a colleague of mine, Dan. He's an outstanding interpreter, so you'll get some really good tips from him on how to safely steer your way through a statement like this. So as you can see, this is the right reply from the Argentinian delegation to the statement on finalization of demining. This is all about demining, this text that's been carried out in the Malvinas. So it's a statement that was previously delivered by the UK. So this is a response to that statement by the UK. So you're going to need your demining vocabulary here. And so, as usual, with a statement like this, I know I keep repeating myself, I'm telling you to do this. So in the description box, but underneath the video, you will find links to the original recording by the Argentinian delegate. You will find a link also to this hard copy statement. So the best thing to do is to record yourself, first of all, doing the statement, interpreting the delegate, and then download the print version, and then print it off, and then watch the show. Watch the show, take notes, see what new tricks you can learn from me and Dan. So, without any further ado, let's hear what Dan has to say.
We'd like to refer to what was said by the UK with regards to the alleged fulfillment of their obligations under Article 5 of the Convention.
Okay. So first, the Republic of Argentina wants to refer to Dan has said what was said, or the statement made by the UK. Now, these words here, these collocations, alejado cumplimiento and supuestas obligaciones, you really want to have in your arsenal for each of those words, a good sort of 3 alternatives that you can pull out at the drop of a hat for this kind of vocabulary. Alejado cumplimiento. So here, actually, someone has written in, you can say purported fulfillment, allegado, the alleged, the supposed, for allegado, for cumplimiento, fulfillment, implementation, that's a classic one, isn't it? Very boring, but always does the job, implementation. Delivery of, compliance with. And then here, supuestas obligaciones, their supposed commitments, obligations, pledges. I sometimes use pledges. So yeah, for those are kind of words, the real bread and butter words, but in a procedural statement, you want to be able to have those immediately, so that you don't, so that you don't lose anything in the second half of the sentence, where there may be a bit more meat, where it might get more complicated.
In the Malvinas Islands, Argentinian territory which illegitimately the UK considers under its jurisdiction or control. Argentina reiterates the particular situation in which the Malvinas Islands find themselves, described in the interpretative declaration which we made when we ratified the convention.
Okay, this is all, again, pretty straightforward. It's just important you just you stick with it. La situación particular, the particular situation, the special situation. Here you could have saved a little bit of time, maybe. Que se encuentran las Malvinas, las Islas Malvinas. You could say just the special situation of the Malvinas Islands. And as described in the interpretative declaration that we made when ratifying the convention.
Due to the fact that this part of the Argentinian territory continues to be subjected to an unlawful occupation by the UK, the Republic of Argentina...
Okay, again, a couple of these, another sort of... this wording again that's important that you get it straight off. Estando sometida a la ocupación ilegal. So, submitted to, subject, I would have probably said subject to the illegal occupation. Okay, so Dan has said unlawful occupation instead of illegal. I mean, both are fine. I would probably have, again, maybe just stuck with illegal occupation. To be honest, I'm a bit of a sucker for calques. When you can do it. So here, just illegal occupation would have been completely fine, and it just gives your brain just a chance to recover without having to think of another external word. So, okay, so Dan's gone for unlawful, which actually maybe sounds a bit nicer, but feel free also to use just the calque when you can.
Argentina is prevented from having access to anti-personnel landmines placed in the Malvinas Islands.
Okay, so here we are. Se ve impedida de hecho a acceder. So yeah, basically Argentina, that can all just be summed up by saying is unable to access, unable to gain access. De hecho, basically is unable to effectively gain access to anti-personnel mines. I mean, one of those, he's going quite fast, you'll see in the original, so you have to make, it's a bit of a judgment call what to drop. I mean, the de hecho isn't that important. The main thing to get across is that Argentina is being prevented from accessing, is unable to access anti-personnel mines colocadas in las islas, placed in the Malvinas, located in the Malvinas.
For us to be able to meet our obligations under the convention. That's why we reject the...
Okay, again, another little important collocation, dar cumplimiento a los compromisos. So Dan has said to follow up on our commitments. Again, dar cumplimiento, you can have a few options here to, to deliver on our commitments, to honor our commitments. To comply with, cumplimiento, comply. Sometimes that's a good sort of calque. That, again, cumplimiento, it's quite similar to comply. So, if you're if you're panicking at all, you can use there are good calques you can use. And again, you assume commitments generally, compromisos asumidos, undertaken, you could also say.
The unilateral British demining activities in the area subject to the sovereignty dispute whose outcome, furthermore, we cannot verify.
Okay. We reject the unilateral British activities on demining in the areas. La zona, it's better to say area generally. sujeta alla disputa, which is subject to the sovereignty dispute, sobre cuyo resultado, so Dan has gone, whose outcome, which tends to be better than result. I tend to go with outcome more than result. Por otra parte, nos vemos imposibilitado de verificar. So yeah, again, se ve impedido up here, and nos vemos imposibilitados more or less mean the same thing, the synonyms. So we've been unable to verify.
We deplore the fact that the UK has persisted in carrying out unilateral demining activities.
Okay, so Dan here has gone, lamentamos que, so he's gone for we deplore the fact that. I think when I did the text myself, I tend to go with regret. For lamentamos, I just tend to stick to regret. You could say we deplore that. Anyway, I tend to just try and go for the quickest alternative. Llevar adelante actividades, carry out activities, conduct unilateral activities. By the way, and desminado, so demining. I mean, there's sometimes in Britain we talk about mine clearance, which is perfectly valid alternative, but it's just really quicker and easier to talk about demining.
Which is in contrast with the bilateral technical cooperation history that has occurred on this matter, which had.
Okay, one thing I was going to add here. So he says yes, which is in contrast with the history. If ever you need a good adjective to go with contrast, if ever the speaker is really wanting to highlight the contrast, in stark contrast. So that's just in case you need something good. But here there is no adjective, but it's a good collocation to know in stark contrast.
Yielded promising results.
So I like that. Arrojado resultados promisorios, yielded promising results. That's an excellent verb to go for. It's a very useful one to have.
Such as the agreement by exchange of notes under sovereignty formula agreed by both governments in 2001 and 2006 to carry out.
Okay, so this, I must admit, there's an expression that was completely new to me. Yeah. Acuerdos por canje de notas. I had not heard of that expression, canje de notas. That is an exchange of notes. In fact, here you'll see that Dan gives you the full terminology. Agreement by exchange of notes under the sovereignty formula. So yeah, canje, completely new one to me, that was. So this was reached by both governments in 2001, 2006.
A feasibility study on the removal of anti-personnel landmines, including.
Okay, so estudio de factibilidad. I think I have perhaps heard it more often referred to as an estudio de viabilidad, but either way, so this is a feasibility study. As in fact, again, we see written here, feasibility study, sobre la remoción de minas antipersonal. Okay, so remoción, that's the only word here that maybe might cause you a bit of moment's hesitation, but it's just removal. And again, this is I mean, so with remoción, I mean, I guess you could use a fancier word, a nicer sounding, like the extraction of the excavation, the clearance of anti-personnel mines. But again, it's one of those cases like remoción sounds quite a lot like removal, doesn't it? Remo. So that would immediately just trigger that in my brain, removal. So the removal of anti-personnel mines, and then carry on.
ERW in the Malvinas Islands.
Okay, so Dan uses an interesting acronym here, ERW. So those are called explosive remnants of war. Now, I myself, when I was doing this, I also used an acronym for this, La Munición Sin Explotar, except I used UXO, so unexploded ordnance. Now, what you ask is the difference between UXO and ERW. Well, for me, UXO is easier to remember. ERW, I had to look it up, actually. I wasn't certain. So UXO ERW is a more general concept within that UXO is part of. And also ERW doesn't refer to mines. So mines are unexploded mines are UXO. But I mean, both all options are fine, ERW or UXO. It's just that I've known about UXO for quite a long time. And that's the one that most naturally springs to mind for me.
Referred to by the ambassador. The final report was adopted by both governments and presented separately in the 8th meeting of the states parties.
Okay, just often you'll see el informe final. You'll sometimes often hear like the outcome report, final report, outcome report, whatever you prefer. But just to let you know that you will hear the outcome report a lot as well.
However, in 2009, the UK began its unilateral demining activities. Despite this situation, Argentina stuck to its commitment to conclude bilateral demining in the Malvinas Islands.
Okay, so mantuvo su compromiso, so stuck to its commitment. I think I said just maintained its commitment. You could say abided by its commitment.
Because we're committed to humanitarian values and
okay, this word here, atento al. So he talks about being committed to humanitarian values, or you can also say I tend to say mindful of its humanitarian values.
Our commitments, both in 2019 and in 2020, we formally.
Okay, so he has to skip the end of the sentence here because I say the speaker's going pretty quickly. Mindful of the humanitarian value of an initiative of this nature, and again the commitments assumed in el marco de, in the context of, in the framework of, within the present convention.
We propose to the UK a new agreement under sovereignty formula, which would make it possible for us to develop and conclude jointly the demining activity.
Okay, this bit's fairly straightforward. Proposed formally to the UK. A new agreement under sovereignty formula that would allow us to develop, conclude de forma conjunta, just jointly. No need to add any more words. Demining tareas de desminado, demining activities, demining tasks.
Is in the Malvinas Islands, which is required. However, the UK has persisted in adopting a unilateral approach.
Okay, enfoque unilateral. So enfoque almost always in Spanish goes into approach.
We hope that the UK will resume its determination to cooperate as it did in 2001-2006.
Okay, so this is maybe a little bit tricky to find the exact right turn of phrase. Retome su voluntad. Esperamos que el Reino Unido retome su voluntad. So Dan talks about his determination, regains its determination to cooperate. So it just came to me, actually, literally 20 seconds ago, maybe to rediscovers its willingness to cooperate. Might be a nice way of doing it also. But anyway, just something along those lines. Even if it means having to say, we trust that the United Kingdom will once again show its willingness to cooperate. You know, sometimes you maybe just have to tinker a little bit with the original to make it sound nice in English.
Recall that the UN has recognised the existence of this sovereignty dispute between the Republic of Argentina and the UK, and has urged both governments to resume negotiations to find as quickly as possible a peaceful and definitive solution to the dispute.
Okay. Again, this paragraph here is very straightforward. Recalls the UN has recognized the existence of this sovereignty dispute between Argentina and the UK and has urged both governments to reanudar negociaciones, to resume negotiations in order to reach, as soon as possible, una solución pacífica, a peaceful solution. Pacífica e definitiva. So I think Dan went for definitive solution there. So when they talk about solutions to go for lasting, to find a lasting solution, a la controversia, to the dispute. Interestingly enough, in the UN Charter, there's a whole chapter referring to the issue of dispute resolution. In fact, they call it in the Charter Pacific dispute solution, through resolving disputes through pacific means. So it's a bit, the language is a bit out of date. But I mean, in theory, if you wanted to be a real stickler for the Charter, you could talk about pacific dispute resolution. It's always a good idea to read the Charter, by the way. That's one thing I can highly recommend you doing. It's a bit boring. It's not the most thrilling document in the world, but if you're going to be working with UN issues, seriously, read the Charter. And then after you've read the Charter in English, probably a good idea to read it in your other languages as well. It really helps.
Finally, I would like to point out that the content of this reply applies also to the side event which the UK will be organising on Thursday, the 19th of November. The Republic.
Okay. By the way, just for terminology, with a right of reply, that's what this is. You exercise the right of reply. That's the sort of verb collocation that goes with it. La réplica. Okay. So he says, so again, this is where he gets quite specific with the instructions. This is what I was sort of warning you about earlier on. So he wants this right to reply also to apply to the side event that the UK is going to be holding on whenever it is, what do you say, Friday the 19th of November. And there are more instructions coming up, so listen carefully.
Of Argentina reaffirms its rights of sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands, South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands, and the surrounding marine areas that are part of our national territory.
Okay, so the surrounding marine areas, so Dan says, for espacios marítimos circundantes. As a circundantes, I think that I've heard, as I say, the surrounding maritime space, but he might be right, the surrounding maritime area. So I think me and Dan were both sort of half right, 50-50. So it seems to be the sources that I'm finding call it the surrounding maritime area, for espacio marítimos circundantes.
I would request, Mr. Chairman, that this statement be included together with the note sent to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom on the 4th of November 2020, and that they be considered as official documents included in the annex to the final report of this conference. Thank
you. Okay, so again, they get very specific instructions here at the end. So in making this statement, the Delegación Argentina requests that together with the note remitida, so Dan says sent or submitted, transmitted is another word you could use, the 4th of November, to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office on la propuesta de acuerdo bilateral, so on the proposed bilateral agreement on the sovereignty formula, they be considered as official documents and incorporated or included as annexes to the final report of this session. Okay, so that's a sort of paragraph that you really have to, there's no room for maneuver. You have to get those instructions very precisely. You have to get them be very accurate, very clear, because if you don't, you're just going to look a bit silly afterwards. So it's always good to practice these kinds of statements for that reason. In fact, this is, it's the sort of statement you're not so much likely to get it in an exam, maybe, but I tell you, in your everyday work, it's very important to be able to reel these kinds of statements off and do so smoothly. Okay, so as I said, that was quite a quick statement. It was fairly short, but there's some interesting words and expressions there. Usually, as I say, I have my highlights section where I look at three of the main parts of the statement. I'm going to do things a bit differently today. So up on the screen, now you're going to see some of the expressions. I've taken some of the expressions that we use from today's statement, these quite procedural expressions, quite bureaucratic terminology at times that are used. And what I want you to do, you do this as your homework if you like. See all those expressions. I want you to find 3 different ways of saying each one of those. Okay? Because being able to just, as I say, immediately rattle those off will give your brain sufficient time to digest the more complex stuff in between. But to be able to do that, you need to be able to, as I say, reel off these very set, very mundane expressions off without any difficulty. So for each one of them, see if you can find three alternatives. Okay, so as I say, it's interesting. You're more likely to know, as I say, when they're talking, if the Falklands and Malvinas issues come up with you at work, you're actually more likely to need to know the Argentinian position on this sort of thing. That's why it's quite useful maybe to refer back, as I said, to that page that I included earlier on, showing the Argentinian from Wikipedia, the Argentinian arguments, because just because when the British speak, they're going to speak in English, aren't they? So you're not really going to have to devote too much time to them. Whereas it's important to know exactly what the Argentinians' grounds are for their sovereignty claims. So have a good look at that page from earlier on. Well, we're almost at the end of the show today, so I guess it's the time where I remind you to, if you haven't subscribed already, to consider subscribing. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the show. Leave some comments. If you have anything, if there are any parts that you liked, any interesting words that you learned, it's always good to know in the comments. Make sure you do your homework. Find those alternatives. Find those solutions for those words that I gave you, and I guarantee that's going to help you going in your future work. Maybe I think there's an opportunity for the first time to announce that if I should reach, it's a big announcement, if I should reach 100 subscribers, I'm on about 36 at the moment, I will be supplying, the Interpretation Station will be offering its first giveaway of merchandise, a Interpretation Station mug. I will be ordering one, so the 100th subscriber will be receiving that prized bit of china. You can put it on your mantelpiece. So get people signed up, so we can get up to number 100. And with that, all that's left for me to do is, as usual, to say episode 10 of the Interpretation Station is adjourned. All the best. See you next time.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time, folks.